There is a road in southern Russia that most people will never travel. It stretches across flat, dry steppe, through a kind of emptiness that feels deliberate, as though the land itself is trying to warn you. The nearest city of any real size is hours away. Out here, there are no landmarks worth naming. Just dust, silence, and a horizon that never seems to get any closer. And then, eventually, you see it. A concrete perimeter, razor wire catching the light, watchtowers spaced with mathematical precision. And at the entrance, a sculpture that seems almost absurd in this context. A black dolphin, rising from a painted wave, built by the hands of the men confined inside. This is Federal Penal Colony IK-6. The Russian government does not use its informal name in official documents, but everyone else does. They call it Black Dolphin. It is, by nearly every measure available to us, one of the most severe penal institutions operating anywhere on Earth today. Not because of violence, not because of deprivation in the way you might imagine it, but because of something far more difficult to capture on camera. What happens to a human mind when every single day is identical to the one before it, and every single day after it will be the same, and there is no mechanism, no appeal, no sentence reduction, no parole hearing that will ever change that fact? That is the question this place asks, and the men inside it are living the answer. Black Dolphin sits near the city of Sol-Iletsk, in the Orenburg Oblast, close to Russia's border with Kazakhstan. Sol-Iletsk is known, to the extent it is known at all, for its salt lakes and salt mining. Tourists visit in summer. They float in mineral water and believe it will heal them. Less than 10 kilometers away, 700 men are serving sentences from which there is virtually no return. The facility has existed in some form since the mid-18th century, established around 1745 as a jail for those sentenced to hard labor. After the suppression of Pugachev's rebellion in 1773, the prison was updated for the deportation and confinement of robbers. Over the centuries, it has served various purposes. It held prisoners of war. It held political dissidents. It was restructured, renamed, repurposed again and again as Russia itself changed shape around it. In its current form, which dates to November 1, 2000, IK-6 serves one function. It houses inmates sentenced to life imprisonment for the most severe criminal convictions in the Russian legal system. Every person inside those walls has been convicted of offenses at the very top of the penal code. We are not going to detail those offenses here. That is not the purpose of this documentary. What matters for our purposes is the sentence, and what that sentence looks like when it is carried out in this specific place. Because life imprisonment in Russia does not operate the way it does in many Western legal systems. There is, technically, the possibility of parole review after 25 years. In practice, these reviews are almost universally denied. According to documented reports, parole applications from life-sentence prisoners face rejection rates approaching 100%. The men in Black Dolphin know this. The administration knows this. The legal system knows this. Everyone knows this. And so the facility is not designed for rehabilitation. It is not designed for transition. It is designed for containment, for the remainder of a human life, with no ambiguity about what that means. An inmate wakes at 6 in the morning. He did not need an alarm. He has woken at 6 in the morning every day for years, possibly decades. The lights in his cell operate on a fixed schedule. They are never fully turned off. Even during sleeping hours, a dim illumination remains, enough for the surveillance camera mounted in the ceiling to maintain a clear image at all times. He is being watched. He is always being watched. Every moment of his existence inside this facility is monitored, recorded, and reviewed. Guards check on inmates every 15 minutes. His cell is small, extremely small. Published sources place them at roughly 4 to 6 square meters, about 50 square feet. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the size of a typical bathroom. He shares this space with one other inmate. There are metal bunks bolted to the floor, a small table, a stool, a sink, a toilet, partially partitioned but not enclosed, a nightstand, and very little else. The cell exists within a cell. 3 sets of steel doors separate the inmates from the corridor. It is a cell within a cell design, layers of barriers between the prisoner and anything that might resemble freedom. Personal belongings are limited to an approved list that could fit on an index card. Books are permitted, within restrictions. Writing materials, sometimes. A small number of photographs. Newspapers. A radio. There is no decoration. There are no posters, no personal artifacts, no accumulated evidence of identity. The cell looks the same on day 1 as it will on day 10,000. When the inmate needs to leave his cell for any reason, which happens rarely, a procedure begins that is identical every single time. Guards arrive. The inmate is required to place his hands through the food slot in the cell door to be handcuffed. Then he is blindfolded. The blindfold serves two purposes. It prevents him from mapping the layout of the facility, and it protects him. The buildings around the prison could, theoretically, hide snipers targeting inmates who might know too much. Once blindfolded and restrained, he assumes the stress position that has become emblematic of this place. Bent forward at the waist, arms raised behind his back above hip-level, hands held by guards, eyes seeing nothing but darkness through the blindfold. He will maintain this position throughout the entire transit. He does not look up. He does not speak unless spoken to. He does not see the corridors he walks through. He sees nothing. He is flanked by guards, often accompanied by a German shepherd that barks constantly on a short leash. The posture achieves multiple objectives simultaneously: physical control, psychological subordination, disorientation, and the prevention of any chance to attack staff or identify escape routes. He moves through a series of locked doors, each one requiring authorization, each one closing behind him before the next one opens. The architecture is designed so that no inmate ever encounters another inmate outside of his own cell. The hallways are a series of airlocks, a controlled sequence of openings and closings that ensures total separation. This is how he walks to his daily exercise period, which begins around 10 in the morning for those who have been cleared by medical rounds at 9. The exercise yard is not a yard in any conventional sense. There is no grass, no open space, no basketball hoop or weight bench. It is a concrete enclosure, slightly larger than his cell, but not by much, a narrow cage with metal bars overhead instead of sky. He is permitted 90 minutes. He walks. He paces back and forth. He stands. He breathes air that is technically outside air, but feels no different from the air in his cell. While he paces in his concrete pen, guards search his cell for contraband. Then the procedure reverses, and he is returned to his cell in the same posture, through the same sequence of doors, blindfolded, bent at the waist, hands raised behind him. Meals are delivered through the slot in the cell door on long-handled paddles, 4 times a day, according to some accounts. The food is institutional. Soup and bread, sometimes fish or meat in small quantities. Porridge. Caloric intake is maintained at a level that sustains life. It is not designed for satisfaction. It is designed for function. Inmates are forbidden from approaching the meal portal during delivery for safety reasons. There is no cafeteria, no communal dining. Every meal is eaten alone in the cell, or with a cellmate if the inmate has one, at the small table bolted to the floor. Television is available in some cells, limited to approved state channels. Radio is permitted. This is one of the few windows to the outside world, and it is a window that is carefully curated. Inmates may receive letters, subject to inspection and censorship. Family visits are permitted, but they are infrequent, logistically difficult given the prison's remote location, and conducted through a glass partition. There is a work component for some inmates. Simple manufacturing tasks. Sewing. Assembly. This is not optional in the way that word is normally understood, but it represents one of the very few variations in the daily routine, and some inmates reportedly value it for that reason alone. Not for the work itself, but for the fact that it makes 1 hour different from another. After lunch, which runs from 1 to 1:50 p.m., inmates clean their cells. They listen to the radio until 5. Dinner comes at 6. And then evening comes. And the lights dim but do not extinguish. And the camera continues to record. And guards make their rounds every 15 minutes. And the inmate lies in his bunk and faces the ceiling and knows that tomorrow will be exactly the same. Not similar. Not roughly equivalent. Exactly the same. This is not a description of a single bad day. This is a description of every day, for the rest of his life. Now I want to talk about what that does. Not to the body. The body adapts. Human physiology is remarkably resilient. Muscles atrophy without proper exercise, yes. Vitamin D deficiency becomes a factor with limited sunlight exposure. Dental health deteriorates. These are documented, predictable, and in some clinical sense, manageable. What is not manageable, and what cannot be adapted to in any healthy way? is the psychological architecture of permanent confinement under total surveillance with no meaningful hope of release. The psychiatric literature on prolonged isolation and extreme incarceration is extensive, and it is remarkably consistent across cultures, across legal systems, across decades of study. The effects follow a pattern that researchers have described with uncomfortable precision. First, there is the loss of temporal orientation. When every day is identical, the brain loses its ability to organize time into meaningful sequences. Memories blur. An event that happened 3 weeks ago becomes indistinguishable from one that happened 3 years ago. Inmates in long-term isolation frequently report that they cannot accurately estimate how long they have been confined, not because they have lost count, but because counting has lost its meaning. Then there is the compression of identity. In the outside world, a person's sense of self is maintained through interaction, through variation, through the thousand small decisions and responses that constitute a day. In Black Dolphin, nearly all of those inputs are removed. The inmate does not choose when to wake, when to eat, when to move, when to sleep. He does not choose what to wear, where to walk, or who to speak to. Over years, this absence of agency begins to erode the very framework of selfhood. Psychologists who have studied long-term inmates in comparable facilities describe a phenomenon they sometimes call identity dissolution. The prisoner does not go insane, not necessarily, not in the dramatic way that fiction might suggest. Instead, something quieter happens. He becomes less. The interior life that once contained complexity, contradiction, desire, ambition, memory, imagination, it simplifies. It flattens. It reduces to the dimensions of the cell. About 160 inmates at Black Dolphin are on psychiatric watch. The manifestations vary. One inmate claimed his legs were stolen overnight. Another suddenly howls or sings without apparent provocation. These are the dramatic cases. But there are also the predictable clinical manifestations that affect nearly everyone. Chronic anxiety. Depression that becomes so baseline it is no longer experienced as an acute condition, but as a permanent state of being. Hypersensitivity to sound. Paranoia, particularly under constant surveillance. Difficulty concentrating. Difficulty reading, despite having access to books and almost unlimited time. Difficulty maintaining the thread of a thought from beginning to end. And then there is something that is harder to name, but that appears again and again in first-person accounts from extreme incarceration environments worldwide. It is the experience of feeling that you are already dead, that what is happening is not life, that the body continues to function, but the person who once inhabited it has, in some essential way, departed. This is not metaphor. Inmates in comparable facilities have described this experience with startling literalness. They do not say they feel as if they are dead. They say they believe they are dead, that the world beyond the walls has moved on without them, that the people they once knew have forgotten them or grieved them, and that what remains is a kind of biological afterimage of body going through motions in a space that exists outside of time. Clinical psychologists have a term for this. They call it chronic depersonalization. But the clinical term does not capture the full weight of what it means to live inside that experience, day after day, year after year, with no end point. If this kind of documentary helps you understand corners of the world that most people never think about, and you want to see more like it, consider subscribing to the channel. We cover real stories from real places, and we try to do it with the seriousness they deserve. There is a statement that appears in nearly every documentary, every journalistic account, every rare interview that has emerged from Black Dolphin and facilities like it. Inmates say they would prefer execution. This is not bravado. It is not performance. When you read or hear these statements in context, they are delivered with a flatness, a matter-of-factness, that is far more disturbing than any dramatic declaration could be. These are men who have had years, sometimes decades, to consider the question, and they have arrived at an answer that they deliver without hesitation. Russia abolished the death penalty in practice in 1997, maintaining a moratorium that has held ever since, partly in connection with its obligations to the Council of Europe. Life imprisonment became the maximum sentence, and this was understood, broadly, as a humanitarian reform. But here is the question that Black Dolphin forces us to confront, whether we want to confront it or not. Is a sentence that the people serving it consistently describe as worse than death actually more humane than death? What does mercy mean when the recipient of that mercy experiences it as an extension of suffering rather than a reprieve from it? These are not comfortable questions. They do not have clean answers, and I am not going to pretend to resolve them here. But I think it is important to sit with them, to let them remain unresolved, because the discomfort they produce is itself information. It tells us something about the gap between how we design systems of punishment and how those systems are actually experienced by the human beings inside them. There is a particular cruelty to hope that is almost, but not quite extinguished. If there were genuinely zero possibility of release, the mind might eventually achieve some form of acceptance. If there were a realistic possibility, the mind would have something to orient toward. But the Russian system offers something in between, a theoretical possibility that functions, in practice, as an impossibility. 25 years, then a review that almost never results in release. This is a hope designed to be permanent and permanently unfulfilled. And several psychologists who have written about this specific structural feature have suggested that it may be the single, most psychologically destructive element of the entire system. Not the small cells, not the surveillance, not the transport positions. The hope, the small, glowing, unreachable hope. As of the most recent available data, Russia holds several thousand inmates serving life sentences across a network of facilities, of which Black Dolphin is the most well-known, but not the only one. Others include Petek, sometimes called the Alcatraz of Russia, located on an island in a lake in Vologda Oblast, and Polar Owl, in the Yamalo-Nenets region above the Arctic Circle, where winter temperatures reach extremes that add an entirely separate dimension of physical hardship. The Russian penal system operates under a legal and philosophical framework that is distinct from Western European or North American models in several important ways. The emphasis on isolation, on control, on the removal of agency is not incidental. It is structural. It reflects a particular theory of justice that prioritizes incapacitation and, some would argue, retribution over rehabilitation. Within Russia, public opinion on these facilities is complex. There is broad support for severe sentences for the categories of crime that lead to life imprisonment. There is relatively little public advocacy for prison reform at this level of the system. The inmates in Black Dolphin exist in a kind of civic invisibility. They are not subjects of public sympathy. They are not subjects of public conversation at all, most of the time. And this invisibility is itself part of the punishment, though it is never described that way in any official document. To be sent to Black Dolphin is to be removed from the social fabric so completely that your continued existence becomes, for the society that sentenced you, a matter of administrative record rather than human concern. International human rights organizations, including the European Court of Human Rights during the period when Russia was subject to its jurisdiction, have raised concerns about conditions in Russian penal colonies. Some specific practices, including the transport positions, the constant surveillance during sleeping hours, and the restrictions on communication, have been characterized in various reports as potentially meeting thresholds for inhuman or degrading treatment. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has addressed individual cases such as that of Alexei Pichugin in 2019, deeming his transfer to Black Dolphin arbitrary and violative of rights to fair trial and personal liberty under international standards. Russia has historically rejected these characterizations, citing security requirements and the severity of the offenses involved. This tension between security and humanity, between the rights of the public and the rights of the confined, is not unique to Russia. Every society that maintains a prison system negotiates this tension. But in Black Dolphin, the negotiation has reached a point of such extreme asymmetry that it becomes, for anyone willing to look at it honestly, a test case for where we draw lines, and whether we are comfortable with where those lines have been drawn. One detail about the prison's security record deserves mention. Black Dolphin has maintained an extraordinary record when it comes to escapes. There have been virtually none from the maximum security section that houses lifers. In 2016, there was an incident involving Alexander Alexandrov, but he was held in a lower security settlement facility on the prison grounds, not in the main fortress that houses life-sentenced prisoners. The main facility itself, with its layers of steel doors, blindfolded transport, constant surveillance, and 900 guards for 700 inmates, has proven effectively escape-proof. As one lieutenant put it, the only way to leave Black Dolphin is by dying. There is a detail about Black Dolphin that I have been thinking about since I began researching this script. It is a small detail. It is not dramatic, but it has stayed with me in a way that the larger facts have not. The Black Dolphin sculpture at the entrance, the one that gives the prison its name, was built by inmates. According to accounts, it was constructed from papier-mâché by a prisoner who had been sentenced to death for rape and double homicide, a sentence later commuted to life when Russia instituted its moratorium on executions. He made it with help from cellmates. It was painted black simply because no other paint was available in the colony at the time. It sits in a small garden area near the front gate, set in front of the main entrance. It is, by all accounts, carefully maintained. A modest piece of art in a place defined by the systematic removal of all creative expression. New arrivals never see it. When moving between blocks or through the yard, each prisoner wears a black hood, a blindfold that ensures they cannot map the facility or see the dolphin sculpture that has become the symbol of their eternal confinement. Dolphins universally represent freedom and intelligence. Black dolphins are extraordinarily rare in nature. The juxtaposition creates a powerful metaphor, rare freedom, which perfectly captures the reality of this place. I keep coming back to the image. A dolphin, an animal associated with intelligence, with communication, with play, with the open ocean, built by hands that will never touch open water again, maintained in a garden that the men who built it will never again be permitted to walk through freely. I do not know what that means. I am not sure it means anything, in the deliberate sense. But I know that it is the kind of detail that the mind returns to when the larger facts become too large to hold. Sometimes the smallest thing in a story is the one that tells you everything. Somewhere in the Orenburg steppe, the lights in those cells are on right now. They are always on. And the men beneath them are lying in their bunks, facing their ceilings, inside a day that is identical to yesterday and identical to tomorrow. Guards will check on them in 15 minutes. And 15 minutes after that. And 15 minutes after that. And the dolphin at the gate is still leaping, frozen in papier-mâché and paint, above a wave it will never come down from.